If the American church is going to look more like Jesus and really reach people, then we need one thing more than anything else. The American church needs more hot people, especially on stage. Now, before you click off of this video and say, Jeff, what are you doing? Are you crazy? It doesn't matter how people look on the stage at church. Hear us out. When we talk about hot people in church, the opposite of hot is not ugly. The opposite of hot is fake. Because when we're talking about hot people in the church, we're talking about honest, open, and transparent people in the church, especially from positions of leadership. Now, here's the good news. There are more hot leaders, hot pastors. There are more really trustworthy people in the church than most of us would ever realize. The downside is they're not the face of the evangelical church that we often see on social media. They're not the famous celebrity pastors. They're not the leaders at the helm of the most successful churches in America. But what we need more than anything now, we need people who will be brutally honest, who will be open, who will be transparent, who will look and act like Jesus. So, hey, if you're ready for more honesty, you're ready for more openness, more transparency in our churches, if you're ready to see a change in churches to where our institutions start looking like the institution that Jesus died for, then this episode is for you and you're going to love it. It's a fantastic conversation. So if you're ready, let's dive in together. All right, guys, welcome back to Church Disrupted with your host, Jeff Cochran. And today I'm joined again by Abby Fleming and Corey Laster. Grateful to have you guys on the podcast today. We've got a really cool and kind of sketchy sounding topic conversation today.
A little bit.
What we're talking about, the title of today's episode, The Church Needs More Hot People.
Yeah.
Especially on stage.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about what that means. Don't click off yet. Don't think we're absolutely crazy. This will make sense as we go along. And this has been a podcast episode I have been really excited about doing for a long time. Corey, I think it was like 2 or 3 months ago that I sent you this episode topic idea and was really pumped about it. I think you guys are going to love it. So hang with us. It'll make perfect sense. As we get started today, as always, we want to thank every single one of you who has been supporting us, from supporting us on social media, likes, shares, subscribes. That has helped a ton. Everybody in our community, from the disruptor level all the way to the table flipper level, we just really appreciate you. And then also the people who are giving. Some of you are just super generous. You're giving on PayPal, you're giving on Cash App, you're giving on Venmo through the website. And you guys have noticed we actually have chairs now. Those chairs were provided by you guys. We have comfortable chairs because some podcast listeners bought one chair at a time. $60, I want to buy this chair. That was pretty awesome. Nothing lavish. We say $60, so you know we're not living lavish over here, but these chairs they at least have some padding and back support, which is nice. But again, we're so grateful for all of y'all's support. But I also want to thank our show sponsors. This episode is brought to you by 2 incredible sponsors that everything they do is to help people like the people in our community to heal, right? Rob Scott with the forgiveness link. I'll never forget the first time that I went to see Rob Scott. I was dealing with religious trauma. I was dealing with, PTSD from my childhood. I've been seeing a therapist for a while. And Corey, I remember telling you, I went to see Rob. And in the first session, Rob, like I call him a mental health wizard. We're sitting down the first session and he goes, "Hey, Jeff, in the 3rd trimester, when your mom was pregnant with you, did she go through a situation like this?" Names off a very specific situation. I said, "I don't think so. She's never told me that." And he goes, "She did. And you're still holding that trauma in your body. And now it's cascading, it's building on top of this new religious trauma and this PTSD." I thought he was crazy, guys. That is crazy, okay? Because the dude was doing some stuff with magnets, and then he tells me that. He said, "Go ask your mom." I went and asked my mom. Her response, "Who told you that? How did you know?" And then proceeded to tell me something huge that happened in her life that I never knew about, and that trauma had literally attached to me before I was born. That's the kind of stuff. When I call Rob Scott and the Forgiveness Link Mental Health Wizards, Rob and his team, that's the stuff they do. They're going to help you not only overcome religious trauma, spiritual abuse, any sort of PTSD, anything like that, but they're going to do some stuff that seems like it's downright magic. It's not. It's science, but they are incredible. So if you are serious about healing, you're serious about massive transformation in as little as 8 weeks, Rob and his team can absolutely help you transform the way you see and experience the world. So if you find yourself being triggered, you're having a hard time engaging with certain people, certain environments, or even re-engaging in the church, please reach out to Rob and his team. As always, we put the connection information in the description, as well as on our website, on our sponsors page, our partners page. But reach out to Rob. It's a free consultation. There's a special rate only for Church Disrupted listeners with a deep discount. And if you sign up during your consultation, you like what you hear, he's going to actually give you a free session. One of the 8 sessions is going to be free on us. So Rob and the Forgiveness Link, they're not just a partner. I want you to know, guys, like I have done the work with Rob. He is the real deal. And then we also want to thank our second sponsor for this episode, East Tennessee Mentorship Association. And I don't know about you guys, but I know a lot of people who just don't fully trust therapy yet. Mm-hmm. I tell them all the time, I think everybody should be in therapy. Yeah. But there's a lot of people, especially guys, who don't trust therapy yet. You're not sure about all this mental health stuff. I talk about the stuff that Rob does, and you're like, no, I don't want any of the magic yet. I want just to dip my toe in. East Tennessee Mentorship Association, they're veteran-owned, veteran-ran. You're going to be actually sitting down getting some mentoring with people who are in defense intelligence. Like these are real dudes, right? And they're going to help you break down the walls in a very accessible way. It's also some of the most affordable mental health care that you can find around. So, hey, if working with Rob and his team sounds like too much, working with a therapist sounds like too much, reach out to Dustin and his team. They are incredible, and they're going to walk with you at whatever pace that you need to walk to get healing. But we share the sponsors for this reason. It's not just because they're bringing money into the podcast, but it's because these are partners we believe in. And guys, if you're listening, for you guys even around the table, I don't think there's anybody that these two partners can't help. And they get religious trauma. They get church hurt, spiritual abuse. They've been there. They've done that. They've got all the T-shirts, and they want to help you too. So reach out to Rob and his team. Reach out to Dustin at East Tennessee Mentorship and his team, and you won't regret it.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have such great sponsors for the podcast.
Yeah.
They're helping us do the work that we're all just trying to do, which is get that healing that we need. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many people that I've sent to Rob and his team. Dustin is kind of a new connection. And I'm going to jump off camera. This is going to be bad podcasting, but I'm going to get this and show you guys. All right, back in. This is actually cool. This is a challenge coin. And it was Dustin and his team that gave me this challenge coin. I actually wanted to share this with you guys too, because I haven't shared this with anybody. A challenge coin in the military is given when someone achieves a challenge. They do something out of the ordinary. They do something that matters, and their commanding officer will present them with a challenge coin. And it's something that they keep as a memento. These are heavy. These are awesome, right? And we actually got Church Disrupted, got presented with a challenge coin after just our first couple of episodes by Dustin and his team because of the difference and impact they already heard that we were making.
Wow.
In the East Tennessee community. Guys, I'm not going to lie. I almost cried getting that from Dustin. It was the real deal, presented in a handshake, just like a military kind of ceremony.
Wow.
Thanking us for what we're doing because they're hearing from you guys. They're hearing from people who, man, the podcast is making a really big difference in their lives. So since then, Dustin and I have had a ton of conversations, and I thought that was really cool. I keep the challenge coin close because it's a reminder of the difference that we're making.
Yeah, definitely. Wow.
So, and I'll let you guys look at that before we get off the podcast today. But hey, that's enough of us just rambling at the beginning. I know some of y'all are just fast forwarding like, Jeff, stop talking. Okay, so here we are. The church needs more hot people, especially on stage. Corey, what do we mean when we say the church needs more hot people?
So this is a term that I initially just really couldn't understand. But over the years, I've really come to really love it.
You didn't know what it meant to be hot?
I didn't know what it meant to be hot.
Never met any hot people?
So I've never met any hot people. However,
you tried to say it with a straight face and you couldn't keep going.
I tried. Hot is super simple. It's honest, open, and transparent. Those are 3 things that we expect of anyone who's, standing on a stage and presenting information. they should definitely be honest and open and transparent about the things that they're doing and the things they believe in and stand for. And over the years, what I learned is that we don't really have a lot of people who are hot.
Yeah, we expect them to be hot, honest, open, transparent, but honestly, that's the exception sometimes and not the rule when it should be the rule. By the way, I had you present it because I'm a little dyslexic and I transpose them on my head and I'm like, it's hot, H-O-T, open, honest, transparent. People are like, wait, what? You lost me, right? So at least you got it. I'm going to try to get it today. Honest, open, and transparent. And Corey, you first heard this, I think, from Mike Todd.
Yes.
I heard it from Tim Ross. Loved it. And then we realized that Mike Todd heard it from Tim Ross. So special thanks to Tim Ross and the Basement for introducing us to this term. But I mean, I think a hot, capital H-O-T.
Yeah.
The church is in desperate need of more hot people in leadership. And that's why we say especially on stage.
Right.
The people who are in leadership positions where they are speaking, preaching on stage need to be some of the hottest people on the planet. Now, they can be like physically, they can be as ugly as they want to. We are not discriminating, okay? Ugly people can preach too. But on the inside, like how they present themselves, they need to be hot, honest, open, transparent.
Good job.
Really focus on that one. So what did you guys think about when I first sent you this topic idea, send it out to the pod host and I say, who's interested in doing these things? What did you think about? What ran through your mind when you heard about this episode around the church needing more hot people?
Well, I can tell you right now what I'm thinking about is that when I was a kid, I grew up in church, and we went to the same church my whole life. My parents allowed me to start going to other churches when I was a teenager, which was that we could spend a whole podcast on that situation for parents, because that was so important for my spiritual formation, and a miracle that my parents even let me.
Most parents
scary.
Don't.
That's scary to different denominations. That's a scary thing. So anyway, I commend my parents for that. But I knew when I was in a big church, and I didn't feel like, even as a kid, I did not sense that hotness that we're talking about from the stage. And this is tradition, there's a lot of traditional, this is before the big contemporary movement swept through all the church. So this is it was not something that was on stage at that time. And I just could tell this is not someone I relate to as a good Bible teacher, but most people were out there bored. Because they're just teaching, which isn't, again, not bad, but it did not feel open. It didn't connect with you. It didn't feel like somebody talking and being a shepherd. It felt like you're in class.
Well, it's somebody with their best suit on. It's somebody putting their best foot forward. They want to be thought of as intelligent and smart and put together. And if we're worried about people thinking we're intelligent, smart, and put together, we will rarely be honest, open, and transparent, right? Someone who preached for a long time on the stage, I'll tell you, if you're worried about what people think about you, you can't lead them well.
Right.
If you're worried about what people think about you and how they perceive you, then you can't teach them the truth because you're going to be worried about that bothering them. So I think that's sometimes why church for so long was kind of known as boring, because preachers were over polished. Now preachers aren't as polished, but it's fake honesty. It's fake vulnerability.
Polished in a different way.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. Tell me what you mean.
So polished in a different way. So now one of the most annoying things to me, because I've been to so many churches now and I've experienced that the hot of the pastors. So I knew that it resonated with my heart. So anytime I go somewhere and I can tell, and I majored in religion. I mean, I've been around the preaching and you've
done the work.
I've done the work, and I've been around the places that teach you how to preach. And so I can now spot that person's been through a class that teaches them how to do it a certain way, how to inflect your voice a certain way, and it just, man, it drives me nuts, and I can't listen to what they're saying.
No, because and this sounds like a bad word. We're not trying to be, hard on every pastor who does this, because part of public speaking is manipulation. There's a good part of that. You're trying to manipulate someone as far as to get them to move from here to there. Okay. If nobody changes what they're doing when you're speaking on any topic, because I'm a communications coach, that's part of my day job, right? If you're not moving people, then something's wrong.
Right.
But when you know the ins and outs, you know the different styles of preaching, and someone only hits the same kind of buttons every time, they're not really, it's not authentic. They are consistently manipulating people. So I'll give you a good example of this. I hate this one, okay? When you got the pastor who can cry on command and at least twice a month at the same spot, if not sooner in the sermon, they cry and you know they hit a certain inflection. It's about 3/4 or a little later through the sermon. They move to a certain part of the stage and you can tell it's coming. The tears are about to come. Yet you'll look around and most people are like, oh, we love our pastor. He's so authentic. He's so open and honest and transparent. No. He can cry on command.
Right.
He's a fantastic actor, but he's not really telling you anything that he hasn't fully vetted and said, I feel this is going to make me look really good. And so I'll tell you, and this is just for free, you want to know if you're sitting under a hot pastor, an open, honest, and transparent pastor, honest, open, and transparent. If you want to know if you're sitting under an honest, open, and transparent pastor, ask yourself, do they ever tell any stories or say things that actually make them look bad? That almost embarrasses them to tell it. Because if they're telling you things that make them look bad and are embarrassing, they're being open with you. And that's a pastor that you can deeply relate to. That's a pastor who is humble and can teach you. If all of the stories end up making them look good, make them look like the hero, or it has a hard turn where they always end up in a positive light, they're probably not being very honest. Because let's be real. All of our stories don't end up in a positive light.
Right.
And as a pastor, I can tell you, my kids could jump on here as pastor kids and tell you, sometimes pastors, we make the biggest parenting faux pas because we care so much about what other people think of our kids. We hold our kids to a higher standard that is unfair.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's unfair. My kids were going to make mistakes when we were in the church, just like everybody else's kids. Yet I felt like they couldn't make those mistakes because it reflected on me, right? So I would just encourage you to ask, when was the last time my pastor told a story or an illustration about their own life that it didn't resolve with them looking fantastic, where they were almost repenting a little bit? Because that's how life works. That's real life. And when a pastor does that, you know they're open, honest, and transparent, right? What did you think of, Corey, when you heard this episode topic the first time?
Well, I'll take the opposite of the opposite stance. I grew up in a small church, and the area in which I lived was a bunch of smaller churches, none more than 50 or 75 people. And I very distinctly remember this church where everything was supposed to be super polished and well put together. Everything was perfect. Everyone loved this pastor. The church was growing, only to find out that the pastor wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing behind the scenes and ended up having to separate from his wife because of some scandal. And it actually ended up breaking the church.
Was that because he wasn't doing what he's supposed to be doing behind the scenes, or because he was
Correct.
doing something additional behind the scenes?
He was doing other things behind the scenes. And what ended up happening is it broke the church. And there was this huge church split. And I distinctly remember, as a kid hearing, oh my gosh, this is why I don't do church, because look at all the drama that's going on over there.
Yeah,
so sure. I distinctly remember the idea that it doesn't matter the size of the church. There is brokenness when you have a pastor who isn't held to a high standard because of the way that they're leading the people that they're leading. So I don't think that, as a pastor, you need to stand on stage and tell everyone everything that you have going on. I do believe that as a pastor, you should be held to a much higher standard, and you need to make sure there are people who can hold you accountable. One of the things that I love about Jeff, and this is for free, in our relationship, one of the greatest bonding moments we ever had was when Jeff would look at me and say, hey, I understand I messed up here. Hey, this is where I really am. And what it did is it gave me an opportunity to trust him and learn that, hey, you don't have to be super polished and well put together. And anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while has heard me say that I've walked through life with some guys who have been doing some very broken things, who feel all sorts of neglect and hurt and hang-ups and anger.
Yeah.
And what I've been able to do is be like, hey, this is where Corey is. This is what I have going on in my life. And they go, wow, you don't have to be perfect. You don't live this perfect life. No, I'm broken because of the way that I've had to live, the things I've encountered. And when you're able to have that type of relationship, not with massive people, I will probably never stand on the stage and tell people about the deepest and darkest moments of my life. But
This probably wouldn't be healthy.
It would definitely not be healthy. But what I would be able to do is to sit in a room with someone who feels lost and despair and tell them, hey, that's not something that's going to keep you from the Lord. God doesn't see you any differently now because of that flaw. What he sees is his child he loves. And here's something from my life, just so you know that I'm not this perfect person. I have a lot of brokenness. And through that brokenness, I've been able to find some healing.
Yeah. And to be able to say, hey, I'm not just telling you this, that God still loves you and hasn't given up on you.
Yeah.
I know it because here's where I've made mistakes that are just as bad or as worse as the mistakes you're making. And I have no doubt that God still loves me, that God is still using me. When you say that, it gets real to a totally different level, right? And even when you kind of brought it up, behind the scenes as a pastor, I've always tried to be a lot more honest, open, and transparent behind the scenes, one-on-one, small groups.
Yes.
The people who were closest to me actually got the most honesty, openness, and transparency, which for a lot of pastors, they feel like that's dangerous because it's the people who are close to me who have some authority who could actually, they could start a coup. They could have me removed. They could start all these rumors. They could think different things about me. I mentioned this on another podcast as well, but I always wanted to be the first person to apologize.
Yeah.
On that staff or in a volunteer role, I want to be the first person to apologize because people actually connect with you more over your mistakes than they do your victories, right? Yes. So there's something powerful about that. But even on stage, Corey, for years, you'd be in the room where I would preach every single night, every single week. And when I would preach and I would tell a story or an illustration, I would always try to call out someone, whether it was my wife, whether it was you, whether it was another friend or a coworker. I'd try to call out someone who knew about the story, someone who was present, just so that people knew I wasn't making up all these stories. Because, man, I can't tell you how many pastors I have heard that they're preaching, they're great preachers, but their stories feel so over the top that you begin to wonder, are they making this up? And even if it's about simple things, right? If you lie about simple things, you embellish about simple things, you make things up in those places, then slowly it erodes your trust, people's trust in you. It doesn't feel like a big deal at the moment. But again, there's some pastors I know who the story's always got to be big. The story always feels like it's embellished. And I have sat in rooms like, man, even this past year, watched a video of a pastor, preaching, he's telling a story on Easter, and it's just a simple story, yet ends up telling some falsehoods about the story. And it's like, why would you do that? It didn't even really make the story any better. The reason why, it made them look a little better. It was the difference in them looking okay at the end and them looking like the hero at the end, right? And if we're as church leaders, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of church leaders for a moment. If we're worried, again, about being the hero of every story, then we're actually taking away from the true hero of the story, which is Jesus. Okay? It's okay for you to not be the hero of the story. It's okay sometimes for you to be the villain of the story because people will resonate with that. But man, I think about the church world. It is really hard for pastors. There is so much expected of pastors that actually, we can talk a lot of times about correcting pastors, but I think we've created these monsters, right? There are more pastors than not are incredible men and women of God. Right. They really are. They love people. No one ever knows their name. But it's easy to harp on pastors who make mistakes, these celebrity pastors, a different kind of hot, they're culture hot or they're actually hot, really good looking, whatever. It's easy to have these celebrity pastors and these heroes, but then look at the scandals and then just pick on pastors and pick on church leaders and pick on systems. I never want to just pick on them without saying, hey, parishioners, churches, I think we created these monsters. We created these issues, or we at least helped create them with unrealistic expectations that we have for pastors. So let's talk about that for a minute. What's some of the stuff that affects pastors that they're having to deal with, navigate, carry, that leads them to kind of feel like they can't be honest, open, and transparent?
I think expectations that come to them from the people that they feel like they're answering to. So a lot of times pastors end up, instead of I'm answering to God, they end up feeling like they're answering to the people that are essentially paying their bills, especially when you're church planting and at the beginning. Sure. I mean, it's very important. And you do have a responsibility to those people to a certain degree. They're giving you money, but they're giving you money because they believe in you and they trust in you. And a lot of pastors, and again, I'm just going to speak from church planting standpoint, because I've watched pastor go down one after the other in church planting situations. And it's because they don't have friends, like you were talking about. They don't have friends to talk to, that they can be open and honest, like real open and honest in a way that you don't want to do to everybody, you know? And then they feel like all of a sudden their eyes are off God. They're not answering to God with his calling. They're answering to the people. But those are, and the expectations they have on themselves, suddenly they think the people want these higher expectations. And that's not what the people want. The people were wanting them because they were open and honest and they were pure of heart. And at the beginning, you know, and then you just kind of get in your flow, I guess, as a pastor, and you kind of forget that and think that they want something because they responded better one week than another.
The more polished you get, the more professional you get, the more quote unquote successful your church gets, the harder it is to be honest, open, and transparent, because now you feel like your success has come. And one, your success came because of those things.
Right.
And two, to keep your success, you feel like you have to put up this kind of persona, right? This mirage of who you are. Yet from the beginning, people were drawn to you because they're like, this dude's real.
Right.
Yeah.
This person's the real deal. Right. What else kind of makes it hard for pastors to believe that they can be honest, open, and transparent?
I think that in this season, what I've seen is a lot of pastoral persons or people in pastoral leadership who have no opportunity for rest. There is never an opportunity for them to be like, hey, I need a week. I need to be able to refuel and refresh myself. I never would have considered this until I spent some time in a volunteer role, doing lots and lots of things in lots and lots of places. And I realized that I was getting myself burned out.
Yeah.
And it's just difficult. Like I attended this church recently, and the pastor was on his sabbatical. He gets a sabbatical every year, every year. They give him
That's
some time
super healthy, by the way,
for a sabbatical. And I was like, that's really amazing. I've never heard of that before.
It takes I'm guessing like a month out of every year.
Yes.
That's super healthy. I love that.
I love it. And initially I had that performance brain, and I said, that just feels really weird. But then I thought, what about his soul? Like, as a pastor, you still have to take care of your soul.
Oh, yeah.
And what ends up happening is these pastors have no opportunity to refuel and refresh. So we end up with pastors falling by the wayside, getting burned out, having moral and ethical failure because they're never given the opportunity to refuel and refresh.
Yeah. That's huge. I mean, I remember sitting down with a peer, a couple of years ago and just saying, hey, I feel like God has given me a word for you. I want you to test it. I'm always very careful. I don't like to say God told me if it's for you. I may say God told me if I'm sure about what God has told me. I'm never going to say God told me for you, because I could be hearing wrong. God's told me, I feel like, a lot of things that are for you, but I could be hearing wrong. And I'm not going to have the hubris and the pride to say, God told me. I'm going to say something that may change your life forever and be wrong, okay? Because I am Jeff, and there's a whole lot of Jeff in here that doesn't look like Jesus, okay? But I remember telling this friend, I said, hey, I think God has given me a word for you. I want to share it, and then just test it. Test it by Scripture, pray about it, see if it's right, okay? And if it's not, ignore it. If it is, though, I think God may be challenging you with something. He said, okay, absolutely, share. I said, okay, well, I'm going to do this a little differently. What would you do if someone in your church, or not just someone, but a staff member in your church, another pastor, stopped tithing? He said, oh, well, we'd have a corrective conversation. Okay. And this church was very big on tithing. Like, if you missed as a staff member, if you missed 0.5%, 0.1%, twice, you were fired. Okay. It was a big deal, probably way over the top. That's another topic, another conversation. But I said, okay, what if they came to you though, and they said, well, the reason why I stopped tithing is it's just a really stretch season for us, and it's just going to be a couple of months, but in this season, we really can't afford it. We wouldn't be able to pay our bills, but we'll be able to tithe again. I still believe in tithing. We just got to catch up, right? He said, I would tell them, hey, you need to have faith. And even when you don't feel like you have enough, if you will give, God's going to take care of you. You just have to have faith that God's going to fill in the gaps when you don't have enough. And I said, okay. I said, what's the difference scripturally between the faith we show in tithing and observing the Sabbath? and his face just glossed. He said, there's no difference. And I said, here's what I feel like God is telling me to share with you. You're honoring him with your gifts. You're honoring him with the tithe, and you're stealing from him with the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. And it takes the same amount of faith, if not more, to trust God with a day of rest that he can do it without you than it does to give 10%. And if you would hold your staff members to the standard of, if you don't have the faith to give 10%, then you don't work here anymore. Then, pastor, if you don't have the faith to rest one day out of 7, then you should not work here anymore in this season.
That's nauseating.
Now, the good news is he took it. He received it. He thanked me for it. Never changed anything. So I get maybe when he fleeced it, he was like, God didn't tell me that. But that was a wake-up call for me. Mm-hmm. I'm not responsible for what this person did, right? So what it was for me, though, was it was a wake-up call of, I will never be that pastor. And Corey, you probably noticed it, because it went from being a time where I was working 7 days a week, always doing something, to I started saying, hey, from Friday night at sundown to Saturday night at sundown, y'all ain't getting a hold of me.
Yep.
I am Sabbathing with my family. And it became like a religious boundary for me, because I had to overcorrect.
Yeah.
Right. But that was one of the things that I learned in that situation was, hey, we can't be honest, open, and transparent as pastors if we never have rest. Mm-hmm. And when we're tired, when we're tired, this isn't just for pastors. This is for every listener. You want to know when you will make the biggest mistakes in your life is when you're tired and burnt out and exhausted. You want to know when you're going to step into stupid and commit sins that you never thought you would commit, hurt people you never thought you would hurt. It's when you're tired and burnt out and exhausted. Yeah. When we are tired, we get stupid, we get careless, and we do things that we would never do at any other time. And we tend to self-soothe with sins that actually hurt the people closest to us, not just us. So whether you're a pastor listening or whether you're just a standard person, regular person listening to this, taking a day a week to rest, taking time out once a month, taking time out once a year, these rhythms of rest are going to help you to fully live into the person you want to be, and they're going to keep you from making some of the greatest mistakes of your life. If you are tired and exhausted right now, let me caution you, be careful. Be careful, because when you are tired and when you are exhausted, when you are most burnt out, you are most likely to make mistakes that will haunt you for the rest of your life. The same is true for pastors. Mm-hmm. So what happens, Corey, like the story you talked about with the church you grew up in?
Yeah.
That scandal came out. And I think this is a big problem in the church. A lot of times when something happens and a pastor makes a mistake, we find out because the scandal breaks.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Either someone else in the church breaks it, or more often than not, someone outside of the church breaks it.
Yes.
The side piece that they had breaks it, right? Mm-hmm. The spouse of the side piece that they had breaks it. And then when the scandal comes out, a documentary breaks it. When the scandal comes out from someone else, especially in the world and not in the church, we tend to judge it very, very harshly.
Yeah.
Right? What I think would be incredible for pastors is when you know you're making a mistake, the earlier you can talk about it and call your own foul, the better. Because one, when you call your own foul, it removes a lot of the doubt. No one else has called this. I came to you all to say, I made a mistake. Okay. Second, if you do that, you're going to want to do that earlier, because you're not going to want to tell them, hey, I've been having an affair for the last 2 years, and I felt like I really needed to tell you guys.
Right.
You're going to say, hey, I've been having inappropriate flirtation and relationships with a person. I've realized this. I've been called on this. It's not what I want. So out of protection for them and my spouse and everyone else, I'm going to take a season away to get rest and get some counseling, because I want to lead this church well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one, we have to make space for that. We have to make space for the pastor who says, I'm not in a great place. I've made some mistakes, where we don't throw them away. We don't say you're not called to ministry anymore. We don't fire them, but we say, you know what? You're human. You're making mistakes. But the fact that you repented in front of everyone and early is actually the best example you could give us. So, pastor, go get healthy. How can we help you? That's our part of it. Okay. But I want you guys to think about Matt Chandler. Are y'all familiar with Matt Chandler, the Village Church? So Matt is he's a pastor that a lot of Reformed Christians love. He's kind of, the way he speaks is incredibly true to the Bible from that tradition. It's just different. He's very authentic. He goes a lot of times verse by verse. Really popular preacher within certain sections. Has led a large church that was multi-site, mega church, multi-campus that he actually has started making those campuses over the past like 5 years. Those campuses started becoming their own autonomous churches because he felt like God was calling them to do something different and to go away from the multi-site megachurch, which we talk about on another podcast. But I love this with Matt Chandler. It was probably like 6 months ago or so, may have been a little longer. I don't have the news report in front of me, but I remember it coming out that he had stepped down and in conjunction with the elders, had kind of been asked to step down for a season. He had an inappropriate relationship. And of course, I start going through the grapevine because a lot of this stuff is on my mind. What happened? How was another guy fallen? What is this going to do? And he's getting removed for a season. He's not getting fired, and the church is working with him to get healthy. And here's what he said. It was an inappropriate conversation and relationship with a woman who wasn't my wife on Instagram. And I've let these elders look at it. There's no sexual issues. There wasn't like an emotional affair, but it wasn't wise for me to be having this backdoor private conversation with someone who wasn't my wife, especially when I look at it, I was sending way too many messages back and forth. It wasn't anything huge. It was small, yet he brings it to the elders. They talk about it. It's no big scandal. He takes some time away. He works through the healing process, and then he's restored, and now people have forgotten about it. Not only that, but when you look at it, he was restored from something and removed for a season that most of us would say that's not even a reason to be removed. That is simple. But because he did that, it has actually raised my trust level in Matt Chandler. Now, I don't agree with everything Matt Chandler preaches.
Yeah.
I don't agree with his take on everything. Okay. But I respect him because he called his own foul. He got help. His church did a great job working through it. And now he's back in the pulpit instead of letting this go for another 18 months until it became an emotional affair. Right? Because he knew I'm capable of that. And if we had more pastors who would do that, I think that would be huge. So Matt Chandler, you're probably not watching this podcast, but if you do, thank you for giving us a great example of what it looks like to be open, honest, and transparent. And man, I think he's actually got more influence in his church than ever, not less.
It's really sad, though, that while you're talking, I'm thinking about how churches, the people of the church, do not give pastors that much room.
Yeah.
They don't. And we don't. We're cancel culture, and we don't understand what it's like to be a pastor. Most people do not have a clue what it takes to be a pastor and the pressures. And so I think the two things I was picking out of that story is we as a church have to get better. We have to get better at giving permission. We have to get better at forgiveness. We have to get better at allowing people to be honest, open, and transparent. Because we say we want that. We want it because we want to relate to you. That's still a selfish position. We don't look at you as a person if you're a pastor. We're looking at you as somebody who's supposed to feed me. And then if you make a mistake, then it's not, it's not the trust that I thought that I could give you. And we cancel you and end with the next guy. Or you need to go get healing way over there. We're broken up. And that's so painful and so hurtful for pastors. And so pastors are looking at it going, if I repent openly in front of my congregation, even for a little thing, what's going to happen? So it's a really sad situation that we've all got ourselves into.
And I think we've been worse at that in the past. And, I actually think as cancel culture has come around, Christians are the least likely to cancel their leaders when they call their own foul. Now, this wasn't the case 10 years ago, right? So a lot of pastors are operating out of that fear. I know people who are still going to churches where the scandal came out publicly because they'll say, but he's a good preacher, right? It's a good, it speaks to me, right? People who know things that have come out, right? They know things that have come out in churches and they say, yeah, but it's still a good church for me. I'm going to overlook that because of all the good they do, right? So I think we moved to this really cool place where in a world full of cancel culture where we'll cancel, someone in the public for nothing, yet when pastors call their own fouls, we're actually in a place where, hey, as long as you're still feeding me, I'll probably let that go, right? But when we call our own fouls, I've never heard of someone who said, I left a church or I thought about leaving the faith, or my faith was shaken because the pastor said, hey, I made a mistake. Because the pastor took time away. It's when man, just last week they were saying something and I felt the Holy Spirit speaking to my soul, and I was so grateful for this church and this pastor, and I felt God so strongly, only the next week to find out they were in heinous sin. And it makes me wonder, was I hearing God or was I being manipulated? Right? So there's so much more of a danger. There is a danger, pastors. There's a risk in being honest, open, and transparent.
Right.
It is worth finding a church where you can be honest, open, and transparent, though, because the risk is much greater of putting on a facade, trying to keep up the mirage of being perfect. And if you're a part of a church, if you're a church leader, a deacon, an elder, staff member, whatever, even a pastor, and you want help building systems, we talk about whistleblower systems and protection systems, but if you want help building a system to make it a safe place for the pastor to say when things are going on, to give the pastor rest, to really a sustainability system to protect your pastors and church leaders, reach out. Okay, hello@disrupted.church. Reach out, and whether I can help you or I need to, connect you with some of my consulting partners. Okay, there are people out there who want to help you do that. Okay, so that's the first thing. If we want our pastors, and just like you said, Abby, we say we want that.
Right.
If we want our church leaders and our pastors to be honest, open, and transparent, then the first thing we do is we have to make space for that, right? But the second thing I think we need to take a look at, let's talk about for a few minutes, where are the places where pastors are most likely to not be honest, open, and transparent? Where are they most likely to lie, to embellish, to fib? And it's not just pastors, but churches as a whole. Where are they most likely to do that? And then how does that affect people when they find out that there's been a lack of truth or that there's been a deception? And for a lot of Christians, let's just say this. For a lot of Christians, we have a hard time establishing the difference, defining the difference between lying and deception.
Right.
Lying and deception are both sins, okay? But lying is when I say, hey, I said this, and it's not true, right? Deception is when I say a lot of things that are true, but I leave something out, or I say it in a way that you are led to believe something different. Deception is a sin, and I believe deception is much more dangerous because we're hiding behind truth while manipulating people to believe something, right? So it's when you say the truth, but you say it in such a way or in the right environment that it makes people believe something that's not true, right? So we're talking about both lies and deception. But a lot of times when a pastor is not honest, open, and transparent, they've said things that were technically true,
Right.
but they were very deceptive. Okay. When I had to do church discipline with a church, they called out a lot of things where they technically didn't tell lies, but there was massive deception. There was deception on a massive scale, right? So Christians, we've got to look at that. Both lying and deception are a sin, and it's really easy for us to let ourselves off the hook with deception when deception may be just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. So where are places where you see pastors deceiving, manipulating data or manipulating information, or even outright lying? And this could be pastors or just general church leaders in churches.
One of those would be attendance. Attendance is a super easy thing for people to accurately report. There are a lot of places that, keep up with their numbers in seats and pews. And attendance is something that is usually not accurately reported.
Well, because attendance becomes an idol. How successful we are, how holy we are, how much, of God's, favor we have is based on the butts and seats.
Right. And that just doesn't really compute. If we're talking about being honest, and I tell you that there were 500 people in my church, when really it was 238 and a couple of those people stayed for another service, that doesn't really compute as being honest.
Yeah. Or you had 2542 and you said, let's just round up. We had 3,000 people. Where did those extra 500 something people come from, right? And we've seen stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like at different churches, not even
Yes.
at the same church. I see it in consulting all the time. We'll ask about numbers. People give us numbers. And then we ask for the data behind the numbers so we can confirm them. And there is no good data. Or when we get the data, we say, hey, you said that you averaged 1,000 a week or 1,100 a week. But when we ran the numbers you gave us, you're averaging 844.
Yeah.
844 and 1,100 are way different, right? I've worked with some churches to where it's like, hey, yeah, we think we've got about, we got about 2,000 people coming on the weekend. And since we got about 2,000 people coming on the weekend, then, our youth ministry should be at least 10% of that. Our youth ministry should be, 200 people in the youth group.
Yeah.
Right. And then we look at their numbers and we're like, yeah, but you actually have about 1,300 people coming. So if your youth ministries, it needs to be more about 130, right? And people's jobs are being tied even to bad data. And I remember sitting down with a pastor at one point. He wasn't my senior pastor, but he was my leader in the church. And I just said, hey, people are scared to tell you the truth because they're scared you're going to get upset if they give you a number that's bad, because it's some of our leadership gets upset when they get bad news. Nobody wants to give the pastor bad news. I said, because of that, you're getting bad data. And I'm not going to tell you who's lying because they're just trying to protect themselves. It's not right, but they're trying to protect themselves. They're scared of their jobs. But I can assure you, you're getting bad data. Until you get right data, you're going to make bad decisions, right? So we even, sometimes in churches, it's easy for church leaders to lie to one another because of this. And then you're making really bad decisions on attendance. Have you seen that? Have you seen kind of the deception, Abby, around attendance?
All I have is this little bitty church that I went to, and they had their, attendance board, old school attendance board, and their membership numbers. And I think there's a lot of dead people in those membership numbers. You know what I mean? And it's
we get upset if people do that when it comes to like a political vote.
Yeah.
But
they
let
would
it go in the church.
They would get canceled. That's the thing. It's if they didn't have those numbers up, then they were going to be. And when I mean canceled, I mean the whole church was going to be. They were going to shut it down, pull the pastor out, and say you all have to go to this other
from
church
a denominational level,
from a denominational level. So they had to, in order to keep our little but very authentic, very family feel church alive. They were kind of forced to.
Well, and I've got a friend who has recently left day-to-day pastoring. Still a pastor, but has left day-to-day pastoring at a mainline church. This isn't just an evangelical issue. It's not just a non-denom issue. But he left a mainline church, part of the Presbyterian denomination. And, he said, hey, there is such a fear, especially in mainline churches, that the denominations are dying, that all the decisions are made out of fear. And there's like from the denomination even, there is pressure that's put on the pastor of you've got to fix it or you're killing the church.
Yeah.
Right. Which that pressure leads to a lot of times people giving bad numbers. But I spent 17 years in local church ministry in the church. And I can tell you, there was a joke that went across the smallest churches to the biggest churches, and it was that you can never trust pastor math. Pastor math is one of the least trustworthy things. Yeah. If a pastor gives you a number, like go ahead and assume it's 15, 20% off, like significantly off. Because even in the smallest churches I'd at, you'd have a pastor who'd scan the room and they're like, this feels like about 250 people, doesn't it? And it's like, I count 175. Right? Well, but there's some people in the hallway. Let's count, right? And I remember, if it was at one church where the ushers would count, and if the number came in that wasn't good because it had to be reported kind of to the mothership, right? If the numbers weren't good, they'd say, hey, count it again. Then they grab staff members, go look, are there people out in the lobby that we haven't counted? Are there people in the bathroom that we haven't counted? Right? Did you see someone who was here? That sort of thing. Yeah. And it was crazy. And then we'd even count at times as well. Let's count all the volunteers. Well, they went last service and we already counted them. Yeah, but let's count them again. Okay, well, like 100 of the people we said were here are only 50 people who were here and then served, right?
Yeah.
But it was all this pressure of we have to give these numbers, which again goes back to we've got to pull some of that pressure off of our pastors. We want honesty, right? But no one wants to say we're going backwards. We all want to be on these big lists and talk about how attendance is going up and to the right. And even for parishioners, a lot of times we think if my church is growing, my church is healthy. And if my church is not growing, my church is not healthy. But a healthy life cycle means you ebb and flow. People should be coming to your church and leaving your church. But Corey, you and I have been a part of a lot of different rooms at multiple churches, even in the city we're in now, where I've made the joke about pastor math to kind of just get pastors to think differently. Like you've heard me call a few of them on it where I'm like, is that the actual number? Because it doesn't feel like that's right. How's that normally received?
Very unappreciatively.
Laughed off nervously.
Yeah. It's usually now. I think this is right. We're right now. Go count those folks in the hallway again, and then I think we're correct. So it's weird to me that in a place where we're supposed to be safe, how frequently we hear about people not feeling safe in those spaces. So like pastors, as you said, who the numbers matter so much, they'd be willing to offer information that may not be as accurate as it should be.
Yeah.
That bothers me because
It's lying at the end of the day.
well, yes, but no one wants to say their pastor's a liar. So, it just, it doesn't make sense to me that we could be in a place where a pastor would not necessarily do the incorrect counting because they would never want to publicly be, confusing or manipulating the people.
They want to be above reproach.
There
It's
you
a
go.
biblical requirement that we ignore.
Yeah.
Above reproach means no one can bring a reproach that people actually take seriously. Because you can say, no, here's what I was doing. Here's the numbers. Many of our pastors are not above reproach at all. But if you try to reproach them, there's a whole set of gatekeepers
Right.
who make you look like the villain. So let's talk about this. It's not just attendance numbers. I think this is a big one, but it's also it's a slippery one. It's a sticky one. Churches are notorious, pastors are notorious for not giving accurate financial information, right?
Yes.
And here's what I mean. Like I have been in churches where I know one of the biggest issues they need help with is they're not making enough money. And if something doesn't change, they're about 18 months away from closing their doors or closing locations, right? Yet they get on stage and the pastor says, as they're talking about tithing and telling stories of, how God is using their, the money and the tithes and offerings. Because of your generosity, we're able to do more ministry than ever before. We don't ask this because we need your money. We're doing great. We're doing great, right? Yeah. We say this because we want God to bless you. And the truth is, no, if we don't get your money soon, we're in big trouble. But we're going to tell you so that God will bless you, and we don't even need it because that's manipulative. And I've sat at multiple churches, even in the last 6 months, to where I know what's going on. Some I know what's going on because I've been told, right, as a part of what I do. Others, I'm reading the tea leaves, and I'm ready to go up to that pastor afterwards, and I'm like, hey, you did that thing, and that sounded great. But those are usually the buttons that pastor pushes when money's not good. How's money actually, right? But because finances of the church aren't reported, even like, hey, something as simple as here's the budget. Did we hit that this week? How many times in the last month have we hit budget? Are we in a yearly surplus or a deficit? Something as small as that would let people know what's going on, right? But I remember working with one pastor who for about, probably 4 to 6 months roughly, didn't even take a paycheck because this was a church that he had planted. And he was so worried it was going to go under and didn't want to tell anybody, didn't want to tell the board, wanted to fix it on his own. And finally got to the point to where it was like, if we don't have a big infusion of cash in the next month, we're going to lose the church, and I can't pay my bills anymore. Yeah. Right? I can't believe that the guy went that long not taking a salary, right? But when he said that, the first thing the board said was, let's take it before the church. If the church knew what was going on, they would have given a long time ago. Don't you ever go without a paycheck again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, I think that was so life-giving to that pastor to go, y'all are upset that I went without a paycheck?
People actually care about me?
Yeah, we want you to be taken care of. But then they get, the board and the pastor get in front of the church, tell them what's going on. And man, over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, everything got taken care of, right? It was a matter of as soon as we were honest about what was going on, right? I was a staff member and I didn't know what was going on until it was like, we're a couple of weeks out from not being able to pay salaries, right? And I was not in a place at that point where I could go a week without a salary. So it scared me to death. But yeah, it was a lot of conversations of, hey, you can be honest. And I think for a lot of churches that hide those things, your congregation wants to give and help, but they can't if they don't know what's going on, right? But how often do you see big successful churches that actually tell you what the budget is and whether they're hitting it or not?
So I'll tell you this. I've been attending a newer church to me. It's been around for a while. And they give out, the little seat cards that you put in the seats. Yep. And I read one the other day and it said, hey, our annual budget is this. It is currently July. We should have made this much money. However, we are behind this number. Yeah. And it was a larger number than a lot of churches' complete annual budget, to be completely honest. Yeah. But what that did is it didn't go, oh my gosh, we're doing so great. It was, hey guys, this is the budget that we've set. This is what we believe God wants us to be doing. And this is how much we're short of. Yeah. And what they're doing
ministry we planned on that we got to not do because the money's not there.
And I remember the pastor then going, hey guys, we just, One of the things we don't like is debt. We own this place, mortgage free. We own this. So we're not losing money as far as like paying mortgages. Our staff is all getting paid. We're still doing ministry. However, there is a shortfall in this annual budget of this much.
We're going to have to say no to things we committed to do.
Correct.
And if you all want us to say no to that, that's fine. If not, though, we have to raise the giving.
Yes.
That's not manipulative. That's the facts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
But when, let's say that same church came up and instead of saying, hey, we're shorting the budget, they came up and they said, we're good. We don't need your money.
Yeah.
Knowing what's going on. Right. We don't need your money. God's blessed us. We're better than ever. But God wants your heart. God wants your heart. And I'm telling you, you know what? Some of you, you're robbing God. They give the scripture out of Malachi. You are robbing God. And let me just tell you, your tithe, that's between you and the Lord, but you're going to forfeit a blessing and you were stealing from the Lord. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to steal from the Lord. I would be scared to steal from the Lord. And some of y'all aren't tithing at all. You're stealing from the Lord. Others, y'all are saying, I'm tithing to other nonprofits. I'm tithing to multiple churches. Let me just tell you, okay? I'm tithing to people in need. Let me tell you, the biblical tithe says that you only give 10% minimum to your church. And then you can start giving other stuff. That it's not another 501c3. It's not people in need. It's not another church. And if you give to anywhere else, then you are robbing from God. I sat in a church that did that not too long ago, and I knew that there were some financial issues. My wife and I were about to start tithing to that church for months while we were in between churches because we believe in their ministry.
Right.
They've done a lot for our family. The moment that was said and those buttons were pushed, I looked at my wife and she said, I am not giving another dime to this church because that was manipulation, right? And instead, for the next few weeks, we did exactly what he told us not to do. And we gave to people who had needs and we gave to other nonprofit ministry organizations. And you know what? I was not convicted one time because we were sowing into the kingdom where God told us to sow into, right? But do you see how by not being open, honest, and transparent, what we end up doing is we start manipulating. We don't want to tell people we're doing bad. That'll make us look bad. Out of that insecurity, we manipulate people to move, right? I know of another pastor who, this is just around the financial issue. For a lot of churches, how they build in a part of their budget is tithing is helpful, but they want to do more than they can do with tithing. So if you're a part of any sort of big, like non-denom church, especially if it's multi-site, if it's over 2,000 people, there's probably some sort of campaign every year where they ask you to give above and beyond your tithe and offering, and many of them will call them miracle offerings.
Right.
And really, if you sow in and look at what God's going to do, and some of it's very prosperity gospel, some of it's just minorly prosperity gospel, but they're trying to raise, a lot of times, millions of dollars in this extra offering. So I know of a church leader who was doing that, who said, in a room full of bought-in volunteers who love the church, right? Hey, I believe that God told me that everybody in this room needs to give $1,000. Everybody in this room needs to give $1,000 to that miracle offering. And then you start doing the numbers, you're like, that's going to be like a $3 million offering. But a lot of these people in this room, they don't have much money.
Yeah.
Like I know them, but their pastor just told them, God is telling me y'all need to give $1,000. And for some of y'all know that's scary and you may not even be able to afford it, but God is telling me to test God in this. Remember about Malachi. And we always go back to the same stinking Old Testament passage, right? And I get using that passage, but I watched like this room. If you were sitting in the room, you could have watched it. People being manipulated to give up money they did not have to give, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it was God calling every person in the room to give $1,000 to this extra offering. Yet people are manipulated and felt like if I don't do what my pastor said and what he said God said, then I'm letting God down, right? And pastors, I'll just say this. Sometimes we put words in God's mouth. I think it's dangerous. We put words in God's mouth and say, hey, I feel like God's called everybody in this room to give $1,000 above and beyond your tithe in this season. And then people do it, right? And they do it in faith because God told them to. And I'm just going to tell you, God is a good God, and he'll come through a lot of times when we put words in his mouth, but it scares me to death. And I think it should scare you because pastors, we're going to have to stand before God and explain why we put those words in his mouth and why he had to fill the gap for what we said he would do that he never said he would do. He'll still use you. He'll still bless your ministry, but
Yep.
you're going to have to answer for why you put words in his mouth. You're going to have to answer for why he had to bail you out off the hook. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. So instead of putting words in God's mouth, let's be very careful when we use God's name, and let's be as honest, open, and transparent as possible.
Sheesh.
Right? Where else do you see it happen financially, where there's a lack of honesty, openness, and transparency?
How that budget is spent. So if I'm at a church with a $500,000 budget, I think that
Which is a fairly small budget.
that's a small budget. That's a very small budget. But if that's the budget of that church, at the end of the year, there should be a way for me to see how that money was spent.
Like a breakdown of basic category salaries, what was spent on salaries, what was spent on worship materials, what was spent on missions.
I'm not saying it should be Pastor A made this much, Pastor B made this much, and then we spent this much on this event and this much on this event. But there should definitely be a complete expense report.
We spent $2 million on Haze and click tracks.
Not at this $500,000 church we didn't.
Some churches, I know they've done that, and if they put that out there, nobody
Yes.
would want their tithe money to be used for that. Now, and I'm gonna be a little salty about these things. I'm gonna use the bad side of it. When a lot of them, it's good stuff. They just need to put it out.
Right.
But if you have a church that says, "Hey, we're spending $2 million on Haze and click tracks," most people are gonna go, "That's probably a little bit too much to be spending on Haze and click tracks." What if we use that money somewhere else? Because I see that we're spending $2 million on Haze and click tracks, and we're spending $500,000 on missions.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a problem. But what about this? If they have to put this out there, there's a line item beyond salaries for personnel that says severances. We spent $800,000 on severances. Okay, well, that may be good. You're taking care of people when they leave. Why did we spend $800 on severances, though? We notice that's happened for a few years now.
Yeah.
Seems like we're letting people go a lot. What's the policy for severances? Oh, there is no policy for severances. Okay, well, what do they have to do to get severances? Oh, they have to sign an NDA. So you're saying our tithe money is going to hush money.
Mm-hmm.
No. What if we instead, it doesn't mean you have to leave the church, but just have a conversation. Okay, well, I don't like that.
Right.
Let's talk to some other church members here. Okay, we don't really like, that's not a great way to spend our church finance dollars. So why don't we do this? Why don't we have the leadership? Why don't we ask you to come up with a policy that says this is the amount of severance we give based on this person's time, no matter what. And whether you are fired or whether you're let go, you still got to take care of your family, or what qualifies for a severance, what doesn't. This is the amount of severance we're going to give. This is the rule. It's not tied to an NDA, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
Well, then, okay, they might feel comfortable giving that if they know there's a rule. It's
Right.
not hit or miss, and it's not tied to those other things. When we put out that budget, though, when we put out details about it, it allows people to ask questions. Sometimes people are going to weaponize that. We've got to stop that, church members. We can't weaponize that. But also, church leaders, we've got to be willing to let people ask the questions, because I think they start good conversations. I'm actually on the other side, Corey. You said, hey, what amount is spent on salaries, but don't put individual salaries. I think at churches, and I'm probably in the minority here, I think at churches we should publish the salaries. Okay, and here's the reason why. It's a sticky issue.
It's a very sticky
issue. And I've had people, so we posted a clip, and I'll tell you, this was one of the most hated clips that we posted so far. But we posted a clip where I was talking about, a toxic honor, and how it's toxic honor, and it's on the verge of worshiping man.
Yeah.
When you have to stand, give a standing ovation, clap every time a pastor enters the room, you have to call him pastor. I've gotten so much pushback on that from Christians who were like, I call my pastor, and I'm not worshiping. People, it's just respect. It's honor. I've had people tell me I'm reading the wrong Bible. I've had people tell me I'm a false prophet. I'm a false teacher. All of these things, right?
Yeah.
And they use 1 Timothy, I believe 5:17, which says that, an elder who does his job well is worthy of double honor, right? And they use that double honor as I should call my pastor every time they walk into the room and give the standing ovation and all that. That's not what that means. Double honor in 1 Timothy 5:17, double honor doesn't mean like lavish standing ovations and respect.
Right.
It means double honorarium. The word is honorarium. It means double pay. So pastors should be paid well, but not lavishly. So here's what I look at. Your pastor, every pastor on your staff, if you're a church member, every pastor on your staff should be making more than the average person in that community.
Yeah.
Because of what they're having to carry, because of what they're doing, they should be making more than the average. Because look, most of the time in the community, the average is pretty low anyway, because it's brought down by some really severe low things, right? But if the average, wage earned in my community is $35,000, I should probably be paying that pastor double honor if they're doing well, 50 to 75, right? Now, a lot of churches instead, though, what happens is the majority of their pastors on staff make less than the average, and they can't afford to live in the community they serve in. You have a lot of pastors who have to live in a community 45 minutes down the road because they can't afford to live with the people that they're serving. Now, on the other side, you may have that happening with 80% of the pastors. And then the top level pastors, especially if you're in a big church, the executive team, stuff like that, they may be making 10 to 20 times more than the average person.
Yeah.
Right? So if we post those salaries, here's why I think we should post staff member salaries in churches. People should say, is this at minimum? Are we paying them the average living wage for the community that they're serving in? That should be a minimum. If they're doing well, they should top out at double honor. Double the average wage for the ones that are doing well and have been here the longest, okay? Right? At the same time, so we've got a minimum, the average livable wage,
right?
And as that changes, the minimum changes. We've got a maximum, double honor. Double the average living wage. That's a maximum, so it keeps people from being all about money. Well, then we look and we can say, are they within the minimum to maximum range? Are we taking care of our pastors? It also lets you know, though, if we've got some that can barely afford to live in their community and others that are making 10 and 20 times what the average is, okay, we need to redistribute this a little bit. Of course, the senior pastor who is carrying more should make more than the youth pastor, right?
Yep.
But they should both be able to afford to live comfortably in the community that they're serving. That's what double honor means, okay? It's not about respect and titles and all those things. It's about, look, you can call your pastor all day long. You can clap it up. You can give him all sorts of respect in the world. And if you ain't paying him, you're not respecting him at all.
Yeah.
Okay? And for some of our pastors, part of the reason why they're having a hard time being honest, open, and transparent is because they're now protecting a major livelihood and brand.
Yeah.
They've got millions of dollars a year riding on what people think, which is part of the problem of why they start holding that back. Again, I think, what do we pay them minimum? Livable wage, average livable wage. What do we pay them maximum? It's got to be double honor. And that's why, kids, we have to know how to read the Bible. Otherwise, we weaponize scriptures because we don't even know what they mean. And I probably shouldn't say this. It's a little salty, but I welcome your conversation. Call me on anything you think that I do wrong. Call us on anything you think we do wrong.
Absolutely.
We welcome that. But if you start calling me a false prophet, or you start calling me a false teacher, or you tell me I'm not even saved, or I'm leading people astray, and you come at me with Bible verses you don't understand and aren't interpreting correctly, I am going to hurt you theologically. I got 3 theology degrees on the wall right beside me for a reason, okay? So handle the scripture right if you're going to attack people with it. But the scripture is made. The Bible is a sword. It's sharper than any two-edged sword, right? It's the sword of the Spirit. It's the sword of the Spirit to attack the enemy, not to attack other Christians. So stop taking the sword of the Spirit and trying to attack other Christians you disagree with. Let the Holy Spirit do that, okay? But if you come at me with a sword, I'm going to cut you off at the knees because I ain't got time for that. Spiritually, I'm not going to hurt anyone or their knees. Spiritually.
Well, so now to dig into that a little deeper, because, I just have to dig.
Dig away, man.
One of my concerns with posting individual salaries for the public to see, what about the janitor who's there 40, 50 hours a week? Should that janitor be making the livable wage the same as a pastor?
Okay. If we're paying anyone in the church something that is below a livable wage, we should be ashamed.
We should.
Even if they're not a pastor. So I think this is it. Again, that range of the minimum we pay a pastor is the average livable wage in the community, but really any staff member, okay? But the most we pay a pastor who's doing well is double honor. Double the average wage, right?
Yes.
Then I think if we do that, we don't have to be embarrassed by anybody's salaries. So we can say we as the church treat our people better than the world, but not lavishly. We're handling this money, this tithe money with care. If you have anybody on your staff doing anything and per hour they're making less than a livable wage, shame on you. Shame on you. I had an intern one time. Actually, he started as an intern, then he became a part-time staff member, then he became a full-time staff member. I was never allowed to give him a raise. The systems were built to where I was never allowed to give him a raise because he didn't hit certain metrics, but he was doing good enough to keep his job.
Yeah.
Well, when he got hired on as an intern, we were paying him $10 an hour. Okay, so he's making 40 hours a week. He's making $10 an hour. He's making $400 a week before taxes. Okay, he's getting taxes taken out. He's doing all this. In our city, he could not afford to have a place on his own unless he had 4 roommates, and he couldn't afford to have a car payment at all, right? So he said, Jeff, I can't afford to live on my own. I'm going to get a second job, right? I'm going to get a second job, a side hustle. And the moment he made a mistake at work, I had pastors above me who were going, hey, it's because he's got that second job. You needed to tell him he needs to quit the second job. And I remember telling him, if you want me to tell this employee he needs to quit his second job, then you need to pay him enough in his first job that he doesn't need one, right?
Yeah.
They refused to do it. And at one point, I had 2 people on my staff, 2 young adults that could not afford to live on their own, not even close. They couldn't afford to move out they had to live with their parents just to do ministry. And I think that's a travesty when I know what some of the others were making. Because at that point, I would have given them part of my salary, So again, I think regardless of whether it's a pastor or not, I think that standard, if we go back to it, Corey, the minimum we pay you is the average livable wage in your community, the zip code of the church, okay? The maximum we pay you is double honor, okay? And you could even put in some things like how, what kind of job do you have? Do you have an executive level CEO type job? That'd be the pastor, executive pastor. Do you not? You can make some adjustments there.
Yeah.
But if we do that and then we cap it out at double honor for that livable wage, let's say again, the average wage is $65,000 a year in your community. Well, then the max we'd pay our senior pastor is $130,000. Okay. Right? $130,000, or maybe because they're a senior pastor, we give them like the executive leadership bonus or whatever. They're making $150,000. Okay. $150,000 just for that senior pastor is more than enough. We don't have to be embarrassed by that. If anything, a lot of people would feel uncomfortable with that. I don't think we have to be embarrassed if we handle it with care, but even that intern that works 10 hours a week, if you extrapolated it out to 40, they should be able to live the average wage. And if they can't, we should be embarrassed. If we posted it, though, here's what would happen. We would be very embarrassed. Most of us, we'd be embarrassed of how much the top earners at our churches are making, and we'd be embarrassed for unbelievers to see that. And then we would be just as embarrassed, if not more, about how little the lowest earners are making. And that just doesn't look like Jesus to me.
Yeah.
So do you see how the honesty, openness, and transparency with finances would actually force us to live more like the church?
I see. Yes.
What do you think, Abby? Because I know you see this in a different way than I do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you guys a question because I know you have both been a part of a church, and actually I have too been this part of the same one years and years ago. They do put out a yearly budget. And so they appear to be open and honest about finances. Or churches that I know of a situation currently that's it's really bad, but the pastor came out and said when the scandal was breaking, the pastor came out and said, kind of hedged against it, and actually used his confession to manipulate everyone into thinking that he was confessing when he really wasn't. He was just giving himself an out and then preparing them that they're going to hear things coming.
It's a weaponized confession, so you don't believe the allegations.
So you guys have seen like different people be open and do it for a and do it for a good, well, not a good reason, but they do the confession, or they do authentically. Yeah, right. They do that, or they put out the budget, but it's not really super authentic and it's not honest. And so what do you guys think about that fake manipulation of that? I'm putting this out there so you can't question me.
Where we use fake honesty, openness, and transparency to basically get people on our side, manipulate them, something. What do you think, Corey?
I think that, I don't know. I think it's really interesting because Jeff and I's disagreement is on that simple budgetary item is because we've seen many of the same churches who we've both been privy to their budgets. And what ends up happening is, yeah, I'll put this number out here, but I'm not going to tell you that this person makes X amount of dollars and then this person makes 1/20th of what that top earner makes. So, and that's where Jeff and I
just gave you the personnel line.
Yeah. So I think that it's important to make sure we're using those numbers correctly and that it's available and accurate. Because what ends up happening is you end up with muddied waters. And I never want to be somewhere where the water can be muddy, because I know that what ends up happening is when the water's muddy, you don't really see anything clearly.
Right.
So where that pastor has said, here's this information, I'm going to give you what I think you can handle, and I'll hold back the stuff that I really know is going on. What they're really doing is creating an opportunity for the water to get muddy. And then those parishioners who are still in that congregation end up getting hurt over and over and over again.
Right.
End up being left blindsided to the things that are occurring. So what you have is a place where after a year or two of those people being hit over the head, they just become numb to hearing any more of that information, which is super dangerous, because you go from finding out that youth pastor is making $20,000 leading 200 people. And then you end up with a few years later going, this person's salary really doesn't reflect anything, but I can't be sure that because it came from the media. It came from an outside source. My church didn't tell me that. So that's like, I don't disagree with Jeff for any other reason than I've seen the way that ends up being twisted. So I would love for churches to show all those numbers. But my concern is always, Bob is only making 20K and Bob is working 65 hours a week. Now Bob's burned out. And when Bob leaves, they're going to go, you will never be able to do the ministry you're able to do here, because we are this church and we've made these polls and this is the greatest stage you'll ever stand on, which upsets me so.
Yeah. So if you leave, you're basically in sin.
Yes.
If you leave, you're sacrificing ministry when it's like, no, I just my family's, $40,000 in debt.
Yeah.
And we can't buy groceries and diapers. Right. And it goes back to that youth pastor would never be making $20,000 a year if we went by that bottom wage and double honor. Right. So I think, for instance, I'll use the financial example, Abby. There are a lot of churches who are part of, I believe it's the EFCA. I have to go back and check, but it's basically like a financial accountability council that operates for all these big churches. It's like an extra rubber stamp. And I remember being at a church where they were excited to go through the process. We have to do extra things to be able to be a member of this. One of those is we have to do an audit. Every year we have external auditors do an independent audit. Now, so the auditors will give a lot of these churches and send it to the EFCA. They'll give an audit that says, yes, they're doing their finances right, meaning they're keeping the right receipts. They're doing finances where things can't be embezzled and hidden, right? But it's like a one-page letter that basically says, this is what we found and this is what we're working on. And then the EFCA will say, hey, we'll put a rubber stamp on them. Here's their budget. And you got like 5 to 7 lines. So you have no idea what's happening in that budget. Well, then, so that church may have their staff salaries posted, and you say, oh, well, this church has, just for easy math, this church has 50 staff members, and then this is the amount that is for salaries, so let's divide that amount by 50. That looks pretty good if that's the average amount, right? But if you had the actual salaries, you would know, again, over 25% of that's made by 3 people, right? So by expanding it, like we all know what real honesty is. If you have a kid, like teenagers are great at fake honesty. Okay. Let me confess the little thing I can handle getting in trouble for to get you off the trail of the big thing. Right. A lot of pastors and churches do that as well. So I think when in doubt, and here's my rule, people can disagree with me on this, but even as a consultant, I'll say, when in doubt, be a little more honest and vulnerable than you think you need to be. Be a little more open than you think you need to be. Be a little more transparent than you think you need to be. If you're not sure what side of the line to fall on, fall on the side of honesty. Because when you put out that information so that you look honest, or you give that confession so that it feels honest, but you know the confession is just so that when the media starts bringing allegations out that you go, oh, those are just arrows of the enemy. Don't listen to those, right? Yep. All of that kind of stuff is just manipulation, right? It is just manipulation. So when in doubt, be a little more open than you thought you needed to be. But if not, like, be willing to give people more when they ask for it. Because I would say it's not just manipulation. It goes back to what we talked about. Maybe they didn't tell an outright lie, but they led you to believe, they led the congregation to believe something different than what was true. That's deception. And biblically, deception is just as bad as lying. There's not really a difference biblically as far as the way that God looks at it.
Right.
But I can't tell you how many pastors and church leaders I know that they'll use that, hey, how can we spin what we're about to say so that it is not, quote unquote, technically a lie? And as long as it's not technically a lie, then we're fine, when in reality, they're knowingly deceiving people, right? So I think church leaders and churches that are honest, open, and transparent, hot church leaders and hot churches, they're worried about being honest and not deceiving people. Right. They're not worried about just telling the truth. That makes sense?
That's good.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. Where any other places that you can think of where we tend to not be hot enough as church leaders, where we tend to hide or manipulate or deceive? See, I think we do it. I think we do it, especially as pastors, with the Bible. I talked about people attacking us in social media, mishandling Scripture. I know a lot of pastors who they're going to preach on what they need to preach on to move the church where they want them to move. You're not giving enough, I have a sermon for that. You're not serving enough, I have a sermon for that, right? Not only do I have a sermon for it, I have a verse for it. So what they'll do is they'll share stuff, right? They'll preach stuff. They will preach Bible. They will use verses. And what they may do in this topical sermon about serving, because not enough people are serving, they'll use 5 different verses that are all from totally different books without sharing the context, and they will build a theology on it of why you should serve, why you're in sin if you don't serve, and then they build this idea of what enough serving looks like and all of that, right? Not only are they using 5 to 8 different verses to do that are not connected, but you notice that they're using a different translation for each verse. Why? Because they went through and they picked the translation that was going to best fit their agenda, right? A pastor should generally only be using one translation, and then every once in a while they'll say, here's what this translation says, but I actually love the way this translated it, and here's why with the original language. But you'll notice they use these verses, they do this, they build a straw argument. Right. And for the everyday parishioner who doesn't have any sort of theological education, they go, that sounds right. And now they're manipulated into serving. I'm not serving enough. I need to serve in 2 areas and not 1.
Yeah.
I need to serve 3 days a week and not 1, right? Because I'm being disobedient because I'm not serving enough, and I love God and I want God to be happy with me, and that's how this was preached, right? Or I'm not giving enough. I need to give more because I want God to be happy with me, and here's how this was preached. Yet, if someone who had a theological education was sitting in the room, they'd go, hey, we mishandled the word there, right? So I think that's a place where, again, we're not telling people things that are heretical. We're using Scripture. We're just bending Scripture through what translations we use, through how we talk about it. We're bending Scripture to get people to do what we want them to do. And not only Scripture, we're weaponizing those sermons.
Yeah.
Like, I know when I was in church discipline publicly with the church, right before a few weeks before we entered into it publicly, and they had a time frame. If we can handle this behind closed doors, that's what I want to do. If not, basically at this time frame, we're going to take it public. About 3 weeks before we took it public, they started doing a sermon series on unity. where they were preaching against people causing division and division being a tactic of the enemy and all that. Why did they do that sermon series? I can tell you for a fact it wasn't on their sermon planning just a few weeks ago, right? Inside baseball. Why did they change it? It was to get ahead of what we were going to do so that people would not take seriously the allegations we made when we made them. And they would rather preach a weaponized sermon series to get people not to listen to us than to have a single conversation. Because that whole church discipline process was about having a single conversation that would lead to people being protected from certain kinds of abuses, right? And I use that as my example to not throw anybody else under the bus, not to try to make it about me, because that has happened. Corey, I've seen that happen hundreds of times.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen at a litany of churches where that message is being weaponized against someone or to target a group of people to get them to do a certain thing, versus just saying, this is what I feel like God is calling us to talk about. How does this apply to your life where you're at in this season? That is a very different message than here's what God is calling you to do in this season. Because not everybody's in the same place. So for me, those are just how that's fleshed out and how that manipulation looks like. Have you guys seen that weaponized like sermons where you feel like it's coming at you or someone else, or it's there to manipulate you more than to help you discern what God's calling you to do?
I tell you, my husband at one church we were at, he would constantly tell me, he said that because of this that I said to him, and whether that was true or not, somebody feeling that weaponized sermon against them one time, they start to question every sermon and everything that may not even have to do with them. And it causes a big church hurt, and it causes you not to be able to trust that person, that they're being open and honest, and maybe they are, but that one time,
that's all it takes to erode trust.
Yeah.
If it happens more than once, then you start wondering, is this sermon about me, or who's this sermon about? And you're looking around trying to figure out. And it's easy to do as a pastor. Oh, my parishioners aren't listening to me. Oh, I want to correct them. Well, God has something to say about this. God, I'll let you handle it. Only we build a club out of Scripture, right? Scripture is not a club, and it's not a sword. It's not a weapon to be used against other believers. It's a weapon to be used against the principalities of darkness. It's a weapon to be used against, Satan. It's a mirror, Paul says to us, which means all I can do as a pastor is hold up the mirror and say, this is what the word says in context. I'm not taking scriptures from all over. This is what the word says in context. Let me hold that mirror up. What do you see for your life? What is God calling you to do right now? We let the Holy Spirit give them the actions. We may say, maybe God's calling you to do this. Maybe God's calling you to do this. But what we're really doing is we're holding up the mirror. So what we got to ask about our churches, and pastors, we've got to ask about our sermons. So this is for both the parishioner and the pastor. What we have to ask after a sermon is, hey, was that sermon used as a club to beat me up and to prod me to do something in particular? Or was that sermon used as a mirror to help me look into that mirror and say, God, what are you calling me to do? And how does this apply to my life? Okay. A good, hot, honest, open, transparent sermon will always be a mirror. Okay. And a manipulative sermon will always be a club or a prodding stick. That's how we can tell, are we being manipulated, or is our pastor rightly handling and dividing the word of truth, as Scripture says?
I think it's interesting when we are the victim of an attack club, because all it does is it really damages that person's view. So I've been in pews where there was a conversation, or I know of something that may have happened with a particular person, and instead of that being a safe place for that church or that pastor to shepherd that flock, they end up making it this attack. And what you have is like people, like you said, whose trust is just eroded. And there's no way that church will ever recover. A lot of times that person doesn't recover when their trust has been hurt like that. And
then they wonder if every pastor's like that. When they go into a church, they're wondering, is this going to be weaponized against me?
So I think it's really dangerous when we make the word a weapon, because all we're doing is hurting the sheep.
Well, and I think that brings us to another point that's very important. We talked about the church needs more hot people especially on stage. Okay.
Yeah.
But the truth is, especially on stage doesn't mean only on stage.
Right.
The church needs more hot people in the pews. Right. And what I mean, we're talking about open, honest, and transparent, honest, open, and transparent.
There you
Always transpose it. But no, we need more honest, open, and transparent parishioners who are willing to say, I've seen something that doesn't look congruent with Scripture. I've seen something that I don't feel like it's us looking like Jesus, acting like Jesus at our best. We need more parishioners who are willing to have conversations, not accusing pastors or church leaders, but to say, hey, I saw this. This concerns me. Can we talk about it?
Right.
Can you tell me why that happened? Can you tell me how we got there? Right. Especially when we see potential abuses. And it is really easy. I've got people who saw some of the abuses that I went through, that my wife went through. And they've said, we've seen that. We're so grateful for the podcast. This needs to happen, right? Man, the church needs this so bad. Yet they're still at the same church that they saw the abuse in, right? And I'm not bagging on them, right? Maybe they weren't called to lead that church, right? But they see the abuses yet never have the conversation. There were other people that saw, like, hey, they'll see when people bring in an abuse allegation. Someone brought this allegation, but we'll just listen to whatever the pastor or the elder board says instead of asking questions, right? Again, when we ask questions of a pastor or a church leader about something we see that could be spiritual abuse, could be church hurt that doesn't need to happen.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want to attack. We never want to attack, right? We don't want to accuse. We want to lead with curiosity, empathy, and just ask good questions. Because pastors when you have hot church leaders, hot elder boards, hot pastors that are honest, open, and transparent, they're going to be fine answering those tough questions as long as you show up with curiosity and empathy, right?
Yeah.
If they get upset when you show curiosity and empathy, that tells you there's something to hide.
Right.
Okay, that tells you they're not being hot. They're not being fully honest, open, and transparent. But most of them will be fine as long as we don't attack them. We're not accusing. We're simply asking. So we need more hot people in the congregation who will ask those questions, but also ask those questions with a ton of empathy, a ton of curiosity, and looking to just understand rather than to accuse. If we can have more hot conversations in the church, from pastors and church leaders to parishioners, and from parishioners to pastors and church leaders, the more hot conversations we can have, the healthier we'll be, and the more people we'll reach. The more hot conversations we have, the less abuse will exist. There are always going to be bad apples, always going to be bad actors. But a lot of the abuse and church hurt that exists in the church today simply happens and is allowed to stay because we don't have enough hot conversations.
I've been burning, this story's been burning the whole time, and this is so perfect to tell it now. I started going to the church we're going to now. And when we started, coming out of a lot of different church hurts. When we started the church, it was wonderful. And then I started hearing how the church was going to sign up to be in partnership with this other organization that we have been through multiple churches that were a part of this organization. And as soon as they adopt this organization's way of doing things, and we actually picked this church because they weren't a part of this.
It's a system that you guys have seen as a toxic system.
Very toxic system when not done correctly.
Right.
And so I started, oh no, not this church too. This is an amazing church. And so I'm freaking out on the inside going, I don't want to leave. This was great. And this is going to ruin the church and people are going to get hurt and people are going to become numbers and it's going to take away all the authenticity in this church. And which
was triggering for you. Because
very
you've
triggering.
Been through kind
multiple
of abusive,
times.
toxic situations.
Yes. In multiple churches, watching multiple churches crash from this. Yeah. And so I was like, okay. And I know that when God gives me something that I have to say it because how dare I know I'm just a little person that just started going to this church and it's a big church and who am I? But I know if I don't say it, I have to say what I see and to be open and honest, even though I've been hurt from doing that.
Well, if you don't and no one else does, then no one calls anybody.
Right.
But if you do, maybe some other people are too. We can only control us. So I think that's awesome.
So I wrote an email to the head pastor, which again, it's like, I'm this little person, he's this big person.
And your church has a pretty big honor culture too. So like Nobody wants to accuse or correct a senior pastor because they're very beloved.
And so I didn't want to accuse or anything. I wanted to share the story, my story, and just issue a warning, please really reconsider this. And because this is my experience and my heart, I am with you, and I see how you're scrounging around trying to get some systems in place because there was a big need. I can see those things because it's a gift God's given me. So I can kind of see behind the veil because God gives me that. So I know your need
of the systems.
Yes,
You're just
and
scared
it
of this
sounds
particular
great.
one.
But this particular system, I've seen it crash so many people. So I just wanted to, share my story. I know you don't know me, and I just want to share my story. And I was, scared of how it was going to be received. Well, it was received fine. It was thank you so much for telling me, and he even said, I even went back into the sanctuary and I re-prayed everything about making this decision. And then the next Sunday, he even said it from stage that he was led to re-pray a lot of things. And I knew what he was talking about. Yeah. He was not
it wasn't a weaponized sermon, but it was letting you know, I'm really dealing with this. I didn't just ignore your email.
It was a big thing to him. And I'm just blown away when pastors are transparent, when they are hot, and they allow for that. And I don't know if you ever watched this, but thank you. Thank you for being that safe place in that moment, because that's a big deal. And I know it's difficult. So I think it was amazing. It was an amazing moment. So it's so impactful when pastors are true,
Well, I think you're right. That's a perfect example. And I know your pastor. I've actually, I've only had to have one kind of negative conversation with your pastor ever. And it was a little bit of a, hey, little bit of a church discipline, just hey, I saw this. Is this the way, I had a question. I saw this. Was this the best way to look like Jesus? How did that look like Jesus? And I remember being scared to have that conversation, but he was great. He was great. He sat down, he met with me, he listened. Although we didn't agree on everything, he said, you know what, his answer to how does that look like Jesus? He said, you know what, it really didn't. We're going to try to fix that. What do you think we should do? And we just talked about it for a little while. And I think in both the situation you're talking about and the situation that happened with me, I think for both of us, that honesty, openness, and transparency, that level of being willing to listen, it didn't make me think he's a pushover. It didn't make me think anything negative. If anything, my trust in the man grew. And even though that's not my primary church, it's a church that I still love and a church that I want to support in any way that I can. And, trying to be careful not to give too much information because we never want to call out churches good or bad without their permission. But I think that's a perfect example of one, how a parishioner should act. You ask us very valid question. You shared your concerns, from your personal experience.
They still chose to go forward with this partnership.
Yeah.
But because I knew that he responded and heard, then I was like, okay, and I'm still loyal, even if I don't like it, because it just, you're going to have that. So just encouragement to pastors.
Because they didn't even do necessarily what you wanted them to do, but they did look at it enough to where you believe you can trust them. It's not going to be, the same issue again. So I think, that's a perfect example, Abby, of both how the parishioner and the pastor should react. You ask a great question, you shared concerns from your life experience, but you ask that question not with an accusation. You ask it with empathy, you ask it with curiosity. Then that pastor takes it, prays about it, talks about it even from stage, really wrestles with it, makes some changes, but not the changes that you wanted made. They didn't go the direction you would have asked them to go, yet because they responded with humility, right, in prayer, and you responded with empathy and curiosity, you had a great conversation, you trust that pastor more, you're more bought in than ever, right? All the way around, that's how we should react to concerns. That is a perfect example of how the church body should work, and I wish we had more pastors who acted like your pastor in that situation.
Right. Yeah.
So grateful. Yeah. So again, just like Abby said, I don't know if you're watching, but you know who you are, and I'm so grateful for you, and I wish there were more men and women of God who were leading the way that you're leading. Keep it up. Fantastic job. And to every pastor who's watching, who you're leading those ways, thank you. I don't have to know you to say thank you. Thank you for leading in a way that shows humility, that shows care for the sheep, that shows authenticity. Thank you for being a hot church leader, honest, open, and transparent. We need more leaders like you. And I'm so, so grateful, right? So, man, I think for the pastor, for the parishioner, we've all learned something here.
Yeah.
I think for the person who's out of church right now and doesn't know if I can ever go back, if I still believe these things, I think even if you're not sure about where you're at in your faith, even if you've been out of church for a long time, that you would say, gosh, if my church experience was just a little more hot, if the people, especially the people on stage, were just a little more hot, they're a little more honest, open, and transparent, then that would have been a better experience.
Yes.
Right? Hopefully for some of you, you're saying, you know what? I didn't know that there were hot churches like that. And if I could find a hot church, I may be willing to go back. I think we've all learned something, but here's what I think more than anything. I think we've learned that hot churches are absolutely magnetic to the soul.
Yeah.
Gosh, we want to be at hot churches. We want to be around hot pastors. And as weird as that is to say, it gets our attention. It makes us think. So all the way around.
And we want to be hot people.
Oh, we want to be hot people. Like, I want to be hot people. I want to be a hot person in both meanings of the word.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything I can do to fix that. A little bit too much gray in my beard, a little bit too much wrinkles on my forehead, but
what I'll tell you is that you've definitely modeled being hot to me. And
just in the one way. Just in the honest way.
Please.
Because, like I said before, through our friendship,
we're getting canceled if you don't check out the conversation.
You've really shown me how to be honest and open and transparent. And I'm really grateful for that. This podcast is an opportunity for the world to see that this is something that you're very passionate about. And just like, I will never go on tape and discuss some of the conversations you and I've had, but I want people who are listening to this podcast to understand that this is your heart. You are one of the most honest people I've ever met. And even if it's not something that the world will like or the people in that circle will like, you value the honesty. And that just means a lot to me. It helped me in some of my darkest times, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate you for it.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. It's not valued as much by all the social media commenters out there. But hey, honest is something we can control. Honest is the one thing that I know, and I'm going to fail at it. We're all going to fail at it.
Yeah.
Honesty, transparency is a free gift that we can give to people. It doesn't cost us much. It's actually a much smaller risk than we feel like it is. And Corey, I really appreciate what you said. I think it's important for listeners to know, again, just being honest, because our honesty about our faults helps other people grow.
Yeah.
I struggled with this for the majority of my life. Now, I've shared on the podcast before, I have a PTSD diagnosis. I kept people at an arm's length for a really long time. And then I got to the point by the time I met Corey to where I would let a few people in. And you were one of the few people that I really let in. So you saw the best of this.
Yeah.
But it's really just been probably the last 4 to 5 years that I have let down those walls. And I've just said, hey, I'm going to be as honest of a person as I know how to be. I'm going to be as authentic of a person as I know how to be. And if people like it, awesome. And if you don't like it, that's awesome. I'm not for everybody. This podcast is not for everybody. So we'll tell people on social media, sometimes they're wanting to argue, they're wanting to trash. It's like, hey, if you don't like the content, don't watch it. Totally great. Right. But I'm not going to argue with you. Right. I'm also not going to change my stance just because you don't like it. People can't cancel you if you don't rely on them. You can't cancel this podcast because I'd do it for 2 people. Right. I would do it much more cheaply without video for 2 people. But I think so many of us, and we'll kind of finish, we'll start wrapping up after this, but I think so many of us, what keeps us from being honest, open, and transparent is a fear of being canceled.
Yeah.
When, look, if you have a fear of being canceled, then you always run the risk of being canceled.
Yeah.
If you don't have a fear of being canceled, no one can cancel you. Right? I don't have a fear of being canceled. I don't need eyeballs. I don't need, I've had people who have accused me. They're like, oh, Jeff, you're just doing this podcast to start a new brand and make money off of your bitterness. 1, we ain't making money. Okay. We're not even close to making money. 2, I've got a brand. I've got a successful brand. And on the business side, I am making money. This isn't about my brand.
Right.
This isn't about my brand. This is about helping people. It's about simply saying, hey, we're going to be honest, and hopefully you can be honest too. Right. But again, when there's no fear of being canceled, people can't cancel you. So if you're worried about being canceled, I would actually tell you that worry and fear about cancellation and what other people will think of you is actually the thing that puts you at the most risk. Just be you. It's enough. And who gives a rat's butt if other people like it or they don't? I finish with this. There's a lot of people on social media who they'll tell me, hey, you're doing this wrong. Hey, you shouldn't do this. I have people who will email us at Church Disrupted. Hey, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that, right? One of them said, hey, I wish you guys didn't cuss so much. And I'm like, my recollection, I think we cussed like once.
Yeah.
And then I had to go back, and that was a quote. So I don't think the issue is this cussing. But here's what happens. Every time somebody says something on social media, every time somebody says something in the community, somebody emails me, honest, open, and transparent, I want to let you know, I actually take that to my advisors. You guys know that if there's ever something that we post or we say that you think we need to apologize for or take down, or it's out of context, or it's hurting the kingdom, it's hurting people, it could trigger people, all it takes is two of y'all that aren't married, and I'll take it down. But I've also got multiple advisors, including my pastoral authority, who it takes one of them. Yeah. They say, take it down, change it, apologize for it. And I don't ask any questions. I don't pass go. I don't collect $200. I just do it. Right. So when people bring those things in social media, I normally don't agree with what they're saying because I've done it for a reason, but I take it back to my authority.
Yeah.
I take it back to someone and I say, hey, what do you think about this? Right. But a lot of times what'll happen is I'll get somebody who just hammers me and I'm like, maybe I'm seeing this wrong. Maybe I need to change it. And then I'll have my pastoral authority call me and go, hey, I just listened to the last podcast. Keep up the good work. That was fantastic. And I'm like, okay. And the whole point of that is this, I can care about what strangers online think about me, or I can care about what the people who know me think about me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so sometimes I'll have people online, those be like, Jeff, you should do this, or Jeff, you're this, or Jeff, you're that. And it's like, thank you, stranger on, Instagram with 32 followers. Thank you for sharing your opinion of me. But you know what? All the people who know me and are close to me in my life, they have a totally different opinion. So that gives evidence that probably you're not close enough to have an educated opinion about me.
Yeah.
So I love you and I disagree with you. But if the people close to me, if y'all care, y'all think I'm doing something wrong, if my wife, my pastoral authority, my best friends think I'm doing something wrong, man, you better believe I'm going to take that check. So again, everybody doesn't get equal authority into your life to tell you whether you're doing right or wrong, right? The only people that can cancel me are the people that I really care about.
The people who have your phone number?
Yeah. And that's a very small number. So if you don't have my phone number, share what you want to share. I'll learn from you the best I can. But if you don't have my phone number, I'm not necessarily going to listen to you. And if you don't have my phone number, you definitely can't cancel me.
Right.
If you don't have my phone number, you don't have the ability to correct me. Right. But it's very important that we have people around us who can at any moment correct us. So part of the reason why we're so fearful of telling the truth across the board, why we struggle to be hot people and hot Christians in general, is because we're fearful about what people who don't know us think. We're too fearful about what people who don't know us will think. And we're not fearful enough. We don't care enough about what the people close to us think.
Right.
Okay. I am not a perfect father. I say a lot of things that probably my kids hate that I say, or maybe I don't treat them the right way, or maybe I get a little too frustrated or whatever. But here's what I've always wanted to do. I want to be respected by the people who are around me most.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody else respects me, but my wife doesn't, my kids don't, then I've not done a good job. Mm-hmm. But if my kids, even in moments they don't like me, if they respect me, if my wife respects me, then it doesn't matter if, Butterfly 909 doesn't respect me. It doesn't matter if, Dr. Nougat doesn't respect me. That's a real one. Because I don't care.
Right.
I don't know who you are. It's not that I don't care about you, but I don't know who you are. That's freeing. Find the people who matter. Let them speak fully into your life. And then don't worry about everybody else's opinion, because it's fleeting and it'll change. They'll hate you today. They'll love you tomorrow. They'll hate you on one social media post. They'll love you on the next. Okay.
Yep.
Do it for the people who matter, and do it if you are a person who believes. Do it for the Lord and not for men. Everything you do, work it as if for the Lord and not for men. That's Scripture.
Yes.
Right. Just as we land the plane, is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners just about hot churches, hot church leaders, or being hot as Christians?
They're out there.
Yeah.
Churches are out there. So anybody that has experienced church hurt, even if it's over and over and over again, they're out there. And sometimes we have to put ourselves out on the line into that risky situation that God is calling us to do. Say that thing that God's telling you to say, even though you have been smited for it every time in the past. If this is a new church, go ahead and find out, find out if it's a hot church, because if it is, you can rest, and receive from the Lord. And build relationships. And that is so important.
And between asking questions about the sermon, between how they respond when you ask questions, we've given multiple practical ways for you to decide and actually test, is this a hot church or not? I sat down with someone this morning for a meeting about 30 minutes before we started recording the podcast, and shared with them multiple churches that I think are hot churches, safe churches they could go to. And just so you guys know, we're working on that. We're really hoping that sometime by mid-24, we're hoping that we can actually start in the Tennessee area before we take it national. We got to start where we live.
Right.
But we want to start in the Tennessee area, actually compiling a list of church safe certified churches. These are going to be hot churches, honest, open, transparent, that have protection policies. They have whistleblower policies, that they're trauma informed. They're trained on church hurt and spiritual abuse, how to recognize it, how to deal with it, how to listen to your trauma. So that's a goal. That's something that we're working on. And again, we really hope sometime in 2024 to be able to bring that to you. But until then, you can use some of these things we talked about today to test out, is a church a hot church, an honest, open, and transparent church or not. Don't give up. Please don't give up on the entire church and the entire bride of Christ because of some bad experiences. And I know when I say bad experiences, they may be experiences that cut you to your core.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to forget about them. I'm not asking you to forgive and completely let the person off the hook. Forgiveness doesn't mean we completely let the person off the hook and have a relationship with them. It means we let go of it, right? But I'm not asking you to do that. What I am asking you to do, though, is could you at least hold on to the possibility, even if you don't act on it right now, would you hold on to the possibility that there may be some good, life-giving, and hot churches out there, and that whether you're ready now, 6 months from now, or years from now, that one day you may be able to re-engage with a church that's everything that you hoped it could be. It won't be perfect, but it can look, act, and smell like Jesus. Corey, you have anything else you want to share with listeners before we sign off?
I think you did a phenomenal job of that sign off. So, bye.
All right, guys, we love you. We'll see you on the next episode of Church Disrupted. And until we get there, try to be the hottest person that you can.